And then there were none. Second part of the Mistress book. In a non-smoking carriage, Miss Emily Brent sat very upright, as was her custom. She was 65, and she did not approve of lounging. Her father, a colonel of the old school, had been particular about deportment. The present generation was shamelessly lax in their carriage, and in every other way. Enveloped in an aura of righteousness and unyielding principles, Miss Brent sat in her crowded third-class carriage and triumphed over its discomfort and its heat. Everyone made such a fuss over things nowadays. They wanted injections before they had teeth pulled, they took drugs if they couldn't. Sleep, they wanted easy chairs and cushions, and the girls allowed their figures to slop about anyhow and lay about half naked on the beaches in summer. Miss Brent's lips set closely. She would like to make an example of certain people. She remembered last year's summer holiday. This year, however, it would be quite different. Indian Island. Mentally, she reread the letter which she had already read so many times. Dear Miss Brent, I do hope you remember me. We were together at Belhaven Guest House in August some years ago, and we seem to have so much in common. I am starting a guest house of my own on an island off the coast of Devon. I think there is really an opening for a place where there is good plain cooking and a nice old-fashioned type of person. None of this nudity and gramophones half the night. I shall be very glad if you could see your way to spending your summer holiday on Indian Island quite free as my guest. Would early in August suit you? Perhaps the 81H. Yours sincerely, UN. What was the name? The signature was rather difficult to read. Emily Brent thought impatiently. So many people write their signatures quite illegibly. I-11 196 masterpieces of murder. She let her mind run back over the people at Belhaven. She had been there 2 summers running. There had been that nice middle-aged woman, Mrs. Now what was her name? Her father had been a canon. And there had been a Miss Olta Norman. No, surely it was Oliver. Yes, Oliver. Indian Island. There had been things in the paper about Indian Island, something about a film star, or was it an American millionaire? Of course, often those places went very cheap. Islands didn't suit everybody. They thought the idea was romantic, but when they came to live there they realized the disadvantage and were only too glad to sell. Emily Brent thought to herself, I shall be getting a free holiday at any rate. With her income so much reduced and so many dividends not being paid, that was indeed something to take into consideration. If only she could remember a little more about Mrs. or was it Miss Oliver? 5.
General MacArthur looked out of the carriage window. The train was just coming into Exeter where he had to change. Damn Nabel. These slow branch line trains. This place, Indian Island, was really no distance at all as the crow flies. He hadn't got it clear who this fellow one was. A friend of Spoof Leggard's, apparently, and of Johnny Dyer's. 1 or 2 of your old cronies are coming, would like to have a talk over old times. Well, he'd enjoy a chat about old times. He'd had a fancy lately that fellows were rather fighting shy of him. All owing to that damned rumor, by God. It was pretty hard nearly 30 years ago now. Armitage had talked. He supposed. Damn young pup. What did he know about it? Oh, no good brooding about these things. One fancied thing sometimes fancied a fellow was looking at you queerly. This Indian Island now. He'd be interested to see it. A lot of gossip flying about. Looked as though there might be something in the end. Then there were none rumor that the Admiralty or the War Office or the Air Force had got hold of it. Young Elmer Robson, the American millionaire, had actually built the place. Spent thousands on it. So it was said. Every mortal luxury. Exeter. And an hour to wait. And he didn't want to wait. He wanted to get on. 6 Dr. Armstrong was driving his Mars across Salisbury Plain. He was very tired. Success had its penalties. There had been a time when he had sat in his consulting room in Harley Street, correctly appareled, surrounded with the most up-to-date appliances and the most luxurious furnishings, and waited through the empty days for his venture to succeed or fail. Asterisk. Well, it had succeeded. He'd been lucky and skillful, of course. He was a good man at his job, but that wasn't enough for success. You had to have luck as well, and he'd had it. An accurate diagnosis. A couple of grateful women, patient women with money and position and word had got about. You ought to try Armstrong. Quite a young man, but so clever. Pam had been to all sorts of people for years, and he put his finger on the trouble at once. The ball had started rolling, and now Dr. Armstrong had definitely arrived. His days were full. He had little leisure, and so, on this August morning, he was glad that he was leaving London and going to be for some days on an island off the Devon coast. Not that it was exactly a holiday. The letter he had received had been rather vague in its terms, but there was nothing vague about the accompanying check, a whacking fee. These Owens must be rolling in money. Some little difficulty, it seemed, a husband who was worried about his wife's health and wanted a report on it without her being alarmed. She wouldn't hear of seeing a doctor. Her nerves.
The doctor's eyebrows went up. These women and their nerves. Well, it was good for business, after all. Half the women who consulted him had nothing the matter with them but boredom, but they wouldn't thank you for telling them so. And one could usually find something. 198 masterpieces of murder, a slightly uncommon condition of the some long word, nothing at all serious, but it just needs putting right. A simple treatment. Well, Lewison was mostly faith healing when it came to it, and he had a good manner. He could inspire hope and belief. Lucky that he'd managed to pull himself together in time after that business 15 years ago. It had been a near thing that he'd been going to pieces. The shock had pulled him together. He'd cut out drink altogether. By Jove, it had been a near thing though. With a devastating ear-splitting blast on the Hom, an enormous super sports Dalmane car rushed past him at 80 miles an hour. Dr. Armstrong nearly went into the hedge. One of these young fools who tore around the country. He hated them. That had been a near shave, too. Damned young fool. 7. Tony Marston, roaring down into Mere, thought to himself. The amount of cars crawling about the roads is frightful. Always something blocking your way, and they will drive in the middle of the road. Pretty hopeless driving in England, anyway. Not like France, where you really could let out. Should he stop here for a drink, or push on? Heaps of time. Only another 100 miles and a bit to go. He'd have a gin and ginger beer. Fizzing hot day. This island place ought to be rather good fun if the weather lasted. Who were these Owens, he wondered. Rich and stinking, probably. Badger was rather good at nosing people like that out. Of course, he had to. Poor old chap, with no money of his own. Hope they'd do one well in drinks. Never knew with these fellows who'd made their money and weren't born to it. Pity that story about Gabriel Turrell having bought Indian Island wasn't true. He'd like to have been in with that film star crowd. Oh, well, he supposed there'd be a few girls there. Coming out of the hotel, he stretched himself, yawned, looked up at the blue sky, and climbed into the Dalmane. Several young women looked at him admiringly, his 6 feet of well-proportioned body, his crisp hair, tanned face, and intensely blue eyes. And then there were none. He let in the clutch with a roar, and leapt up the narrow street. Old men and errand boys jumped for safety. The latter looked after the car admiringly. Anthony Marston proceeded on his triumphal progress.